Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to Tipping Point. I am your host, Andrew Potkowitz. We gather here weekly, Thursdays at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, to connect with industry entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and experts to try and learn something and have some fun conversations. I am particularly thrilled today to have Leah Beck of Culinary Digital with us for a number of reasons, not the least of which I have countless questions around this field. And we were trying to schedule this for quite some time. We finally scheduled it for last week. And then I was lucky enough to have a kidney stone and was taken completely out of commission for about 5 days. So thankfully we were able to reschedule today. So welcome, Leah.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
So I want to go down a few tracks here with you. I want to learn a bit more about your background. It's an interesting one, going from nutrition and dietary into tech. But yeah, if you want to just do a quick introduction of yourself and give us a bit of your background, please.
So I'm a registered dietitian. My career has been in food service management from K through 12 to CNU, higher education dining. Primarily, menu development, nutrition education, and then in my more recent roles, in the last 5 or so years, I've discovered the world of nutrition and culinary technology. So that's where I've been doing software implementations and system administration. So it's been a fun, exciting journey.
Very, very cool. And just a quick reminder, we are live out across LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. So for any folks out there in the audience who have any questions as we go down these different paths of nutrition and technology, by all means, drop a comment in the comment section and we will address those questions and comments as we go. So I guess we'll start from the beginning, like nutrition and dietary requirements. Like what drew you to that? And I guess for those of us who are less educated in the space, which includes me, what does that mean?
Well, I guess to start, my journey to nutrition is probably very unique. In high school, I went on a trip to India with my father. He has a very long history with going to India, and so he invited me to go. And we were there for probably 7-10 days and traveling around. And towards the end of the trip, I was getting kind of a sore throat. And we were staying with some family friends, and the mother had said, "Oh, here's some ginger tea." And I thought, ginger tea, like I could use some medicine, but okay. And my throat healed within like a day or two. And up until that point, I was like, oh, the only way you can heal is through medicine. And that was really the first moment that I made this connection between food healing the body. And so, I mean, that was high school, and in college, I studied nutrition. I kind of further explored that relationship as food as medicine. And that's really what sparked my curiosity and interest in nutrition. And then more specifically with like food service, I love to cook. I think there's such dynamic and creative energy around the culinary world. So it's something that I enjoy. I think today nutrition really is just, it can be very confusing and overwhelming for a lot of people. So I try, when I provide education and when I talk about nutrition, I try to keep it very simple and, practical.
So quickly going back to your India ginger tea experience, I sort of go back to my childhood where anytime I had an upset stomach, and my mom or whomever would say, like, have some ginger ale and Triscuits. You're saying there's something to that ginger ale piece? Interesting.
Yeah, it helps with digestion and the stomach, and and there's so many things too that like are just so intuitive and part of our day-to-day that you don't realize there's intention behind it. Yeah.
I mean, I think back to when I was growing up, I guess, going down this path. When it came to nutrition, I continue to be horrific when it comes to what I put in my body in terms of food. Um, it was, it was chicken nuggets on Thursday. It was Taco Tuesday. It was like sloppy Joe Friday. Like that, and maybe there must have been some thought put into school meals when I was growing up,
Mhm.
but certainly not the level that's put in today. And when I think back to what was in our snack cabinet growing up, whether it was fruit roll-ups or gummy bears or any number of things that, I look back and go that, I mean, my diet was pretty atrocious. There's been a pretty big paradigm shift there. Not, I think, just with parents and what they sort of want their kids to eat, but I think just an overall consciousness of like what's good to put in your body. Can you talk a little bit about, what that's looked like since since I was in grade school? And I won't give you years to date myself, but what's been going on in that space?
Yeah, I mean, I remember when you talk about that, I remember like going through the lunch line and they would check my tray and say, "You need a milk or you need an apple." That was
Really?
like complete, yeah. And I remember thinking, why do I need to eat this? Like or why do I need to take it? I'm not going to eat it. I'm going to throw it away. But I think, that's, I would say at least within the, I mean, we all know that obesity rates, diabetes, our health has been on a rapid decline. And so it's really, I think people are paying more attention to um, our diet and how that relates to our health. And particularly with schools, I mean, kids are going to school every day. And so it's an opportunity to create an environment where making healthy food accessible is easy. You don't have to think about it. And so how can we make that more enticing, exciting, enjoyable? It's a challenge.
I think didn't they do that? And I don't remember when Popeye came out. I want to say like the 40s and 50s, but wasn't
Yeah.
that a whole spinach? Like, wasn't there a
Makes you
whole
long.
leadership
Yeah.
there that, Popeye eats spinach, gets strong, and then kids are like, oh, I want spinach, even though, and even as an adult, there are, foods that are good for you. I don't want to say it don't always taste good.
Mhm.
I think that's changing, but that's a huge challenge as a kid. You don't want to eat. I mean, beets as a kid, or that was like the teachers. That was the teachers' food. The teachers would go to
Mhm.
the salad bar and have beets and Brussels sprouts. And as a kid, you're like, ew, that's gross. I know that's not the extent of what nutrition looks like, but
Mhm.
outside of like PSAs on TV growing up about the four food groups, I don't know. Is that still a thing? Do we have four food groups?
The food pyramid. Well, now it's the food. It's my plate. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, I'm curious as an adult and as a human, like what goes into outside of sort of recipe creation and menu curation. Like, what does that look like on sort of a planning basis, a day to day, week to week, month to month? Like what's going into these various initiatives around, properly planning, diets for, in particular, students, whether it's K through 12 or higher ed or healthcare, elder care.
I would say there's a huge emphasis on fruits and vegetables.
Okay.
Obviously, we try to increase fiber intake, but variety too. I mean, we are a culture now where we need constant change and constant stimulation. So, trying to keep things interesting and changing every day. Um, a variety of proteins, grains, and colors all go into like that thought process. And two, I mean, sustainability. I mean, you don't want to be eating the same food every day from a sustainability perspective, right? Like fish every day or chicken every day. So there's just so many factors that go into planning menus. And also, what does the customer want and what are they consuming? All of that.
So we're talking about supplying the right food to the end user, right? I mean,
Mhm.
put simply in logistics terms, end user being, let's say, students. And then in between sort of the menu creation and the calendar and the student consumption of it, you've got a whole range of folks involved in that process, whether it's
Mhm.
supply chain ordering food. Can you talk us through, and I may be over my skis here a bit because I don't know. You were doing this prior to moving into sort of the tech space. So can you talk about sort of what goes into planning this process around nutrition and menu planning?
I mean, it's a real collective effort. You have a team of obviously nutrition representation, the dietitian. You have chefs involved, sustainability. It's, sometimes I've written menus and I share it with a chef to kind of provide their feedback. Sometimes it goes the other way. Something that I think a lot of people don't think about is, kitchen space, labor. If you're preparing something in the oven, then let's get something on the flat top or the grill. Like you want to try and diversify your equipment and where people are in the kitchen preparing the food, so that not everything is going into the oven and then things can come out at the same time. But then also, like, nutritionally, like I said, you want to have variety, so you're not just eating the same foods breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I don't know, like I think about having a sandwich for lunch and pasta for dinner, like that's pretty carb heavy. So like, how can you change that up? And then, cost, all that.
I always wonder, how do diners do it? Like you go to some restaurants, let's say, mm-hmm. where, there's 3 or 4 appetizers and there's 4 or 5, whatever entrees, mm-hmm. desserts. You're like, okay, that makes sense, sourcing it. I don't know how diners pull it off. I imagine like there's certain ingredients, like a lot of people get like breakfast foods at diners, mm-hmm. but when you look at just the sheer number of things on a menu in like your average diner, it's tremendous. Like, sometimes you wonder how fresh can the food be if they don't make lobster thermidor that often. And then you look at some of these fast food, chains. You look at something like, Chipotle or Taco Bell, where you've got a more limited number of ingredients, but you have a lot more dishes you can make because a lot of dishes have similar ingredients. Mm-hmm. So, how much does that go into the planning of sort of a weekly or monthly menu of what the, how much is ingredient and sourcing driven? How much is caloric intake and nutrients and vitamins, or is it, is it a marriage of both? And is there? It
has to be. And you also have to take into account, my background's in higher education, so you always have to take into account the customer feedback. What are they consuming? What are they not consuming? And also it depends on the environment. So like a restaurant, you may only go there once a week or once a month, but in higher education and dining halls, you're going there breakfast, lunch, and dinner 7 days a week. So it depends on the environment, how much variety. Ideally, the more streamlined your menu is, you can really focus on quality, because you can really spend more on quality ingredients versus when you have a variety of options, you have to be more selective on where that money is going.
So I'm going to ask you a personal question. When you were in college, mm-hmm. were you, I imagine if you were interested in this, I guess early on with your trip to India, sparking that, what was your college diet like? Were you a responsible eater?
I'm trying to even remember. I think that I grew up in a very health conscious home. Okay. So we didn't have a lot of sugary cereals. We didn't have a lot of, it was pretty simple and standard. So I think going to college, like for myself and a lot of people, it's their first time away from home and they have access to all this food. So
Fruity Pebbles, Fruit Loops. Sorry.
Yeah. And I think there was certainly a period of time where like I was really trying it all. And I think towards my later years, I moved off campus. I had my own kitchen. So that's where I kind of experimented. But I think that's normal and typical and,
Well, I agree. And I've already sort of disclosed that I'm not the healthiest eater. But when you look at, a K through 12 environment where, mm-hmm. you've got what's there, right? You have the lunch line, right? And you might have two options if you're lucky, but like if it's chicken nuggets that day, it's chicken nuggets. And then you go into higher education where you've got more diverse dining halls in the different areas of campus potentially, and you're not just waiting in an assembly line to have your tray filled up. You actually have options to choose from. Let's face it, historically, collegiate age people are not hyper focused on the nutrient value of what they're eating. It's a lot more, oh, that looks good, or I want a burger, or I want nachos, or whatever it is. So I imagine that there's sort of a challenge there. So you got the one challenge of menu planning versus logistics. And then you've got the other challenge of like, well, as you said, what do the consumers want versus what should the consumers be eating? And college kids are notorious for eating garbage. So I guess that's pretty an interesting, a good segue into, I think, talking a little bit about culinary digital, and sort of what and well, culinary digital, which is where you currently are, has three service offering or three product offerings, a food service ERP, menu planning, and digital signage. And I think I'd like to, before getting into what those are, if you could talk about, you went from doing that sort of student facing, and then you went into the university space to do this, to say, hey, how can you take this knowledge of recipe planning and menu planning and nutrients and dietary planning, and bring that, scale it technically. So can you talk a little bit about, I know you went over to UC Davis for a bit. Can you talk about what you guys were doing over there?
So at that time they were transitioning to a new, call it food service software. So I helped to implement really from scratch, all new, migrating data, but also like creating new process around how to use the software. And what's interesting about UC Davis, everywhere, but there's a huge emphasis on sustainability, nutrition. California, you've got an abundance of great accessible food. So that is a huge part of their program, and utilizing the technology to, maximize what you're serving from a sustainability standpoint. And yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it does. And I also, California doesn't just have I think it's like the fifth largest economy in the world, or some crazy statistic like that. And obviously a lot of agriculture in California, as well as a lot of people who are probably more health conscious on average than the rest of the country. So I imagine maybe the student population is a bit more demanding when it comes to healthier eating and certainly sustainability. And I guess that's another area that to talk about the recipe. This is like partridge in a pear tree. We're going down. You got the menu and recipe planning, you got the logistics, you got the end user, what they should eat versus what they do eat, but then you also have the sort of more social demands on the whole system of sustainability.
Yeah. The other thing I would say too about what's so fascinating about colleges and university and that demographic is a lot of times they say they want, the healthier option, but the reality is they're not necessarily making those choices. And I get it. You're stressed. You're trying to get in and out so you can study. Like there's just so many variables in that environment. But I think a huge part of when it comes to like being strategic with menu design is like, okay, like you're always going to have pizza or the chicken nuggets or whatever it is, but how can you make the healthier choice the easier choice? And so like thinking about, and it's not just, what your menu offering is, but it's how you're offering it. So like, what's the language behind it? How are you describing the food? Where in the servery are you presenting it? Are you putting it the healthy option way in the corner? Are you putting it like, front and center for people? Like there's so many strategies even going into how you serve the food that can influence, consumption.
I think that's a really good point, and I think a fascinating area, which I would love if you would talk a little bit more about. you know, with the sort of preface of, I remember being in school where a lot of times you'd be like, I'm sorry, what is this? Right. So
Yeah.
you literally, it's, there was a term, right? Mystery meat. Like it was, you were eating mystery meat. And so, yeah, can you talk about, talk us through what that looks like now?
I mean, there's a lot of research. There are people who actually study, behavior when it comes to food. And I mean, you can implement it in um, just like how you arrange your menu, like when you go into a restaurant and how it's displayed, to like a servery, to even in your home. I mean, there's strategies even in your home that you can make it so that you're eating better. You have access to better foods, more often. But yeah, I mean, it's a huge area of exploration right now. Just even like the traits that you use to describe food, like is vegan, the vegan burger, or like the vegan wrap. I mean, there's so many more appetizing ways you could label that and describe it that would make it accessible to everyone, not just people who choose to eat a vegan diet, for example.
Yeah, and I guess that's partly marketing, I suppose,
Yeah.
right? And there's obviously been a push, and having lived in New York for a while, and being from the Northeast originally, I don't know if this is just New York, if this is national, but when it comes to like restaurant chains, for example, if there's over a certain, I think it's 10 or something, don't quote me on it. You need to have the caloric content of your dishes printed on the menu. So obviously you go into, a McDonald's, or I don't know how often you go into a McDonald's, but you go into a fast food restaurant, and to your point, there are times where I'll go into, whether it's Subway or Wendy's or any other place where I might frequent, and I'll look at something, and on the face of it, I'd be like, oh no, that seems like it's really not good for me, and like has high caloric content. And then I'll read it, like, actually, it's actually better for me than the thing I was going to get. Have you been seeing, through your we'll get to sort of your next university stint, but are you seeing more emphasis from the higher ed student population of understanding, not just obviously how appetizing it looks and or sounds, but what the ingredients are and what it's made up of?
Yeah, and that's really interesting you brought that up about like the calorie charts, because I mean you can see it online and in on menu boards, but that's also a big topic of debate is, do you display calorie information? Do you display that, or do you keep that private? And that's really going back to like, I mean, you're talking eating disorders, like what's important? Is it the calories that are important, or is it the food that's important, and nutrition density?
Right.
So like, 500 calories of spinach is much larger than 500 calories of fries, so that's where nutrition education is really important, especially, I mean, in that population, and educating people in general about making food choices when you're talking about fruits and vegetables, nutrient density versus calories, fat, things like that. So, yeah.
When you look at any consumer packaged good product, when you look at sort of the nutrient panel, what do you look at? Like, I should say, you probably look at all of it. I shouldn't make that assumption there. In what order do you look at? What are the priorities for you when you're looking at those nutrient values?
I mean, I think it depends on the food, the category. I mean, am I looking at trail mix? Am I looking at, a sandwich? I definitely look at sodium,
Yeah.
iron. And they actually recently changed a couple years ago, they changed the nutrition facts panel because they wanted to focus or emphasize, like at the bottom, you'll see, potassium, I think it's potassium, iron, nutrients of concern. So things people aren't getting enough of.
Interesting.
So I do look at that,
Right.
fiber, sodium, and then the ingredients I look at.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know that they have, I don't think they did this as a kid when I was a kid, but there's like fat and there's saturated fat, and they break it down, like the different kinds of fat.
Added sugar too.
I wish they would standardize what a serving is, because I'm educated enough now to know to look at the actual grams versus,
Mhm.
how many pieces, whatever it is. And it's not uniform, right? Sometimes the serving's
Mhm.
28 grams, sometimes it's 32 grams, and it can be deceiving when it has the high level, per serving. I think in Europe they do both serving and full package, I think, or they do it by 100
They do
grams.
100 grams. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can at least, it's comparable. And,
Mhm.
I have no doubt that that's more of a marketing thing than it is a education thing, that folks are able to manipulate those, I think, a little bit to.
Yeah, it is confusing, and that's why like you have to kind of take the nutrition facts and um, look at it more, not on like a literal sense, but more holistically. Like, there's a rule of thumb, like if anything is like 20% or higher, that means it's high in a nutrient. So like if it's 20% sodium, that's high sodium. So I kind of look at those numbers and from a generic perspective. But yeah, uh, it is confusing, and there could be more there.
More clarity and more uniform and more
Yeah,
regulation, but uniformity.
yeah.
And I asked that question about what you look at on like the nutrient panel, and I think most folks look at calories, maybe fat, and then maybe sodium. Right, sodium is always like a big, if it's high in sodium. Um, but quite frankly, I look at the rest of the stuff and like I don't even know. Right, I understand at a basic level that there's like your recommended daily,
Mhm.
what's it called, daily
Intake.
daily intake, and it has like a percentage, like, oh, if one orange is 10% of like your
Mhm.
calcium, you have 10 oranges, in theory you've had 100% of what you should have in calcium per day.
Mhm.
But like
Yeah.
no one's measuring that against other products that they're making at home for themselves. So I guess when you look at sort of what you're doing and have done in like the industrial space on an industrial food service level, um,
Mhm.
you are doing that work for individuals, right? They can come
Mhm.
and they can have that meal or that dish, um, and trust that it has like, the right combination or like the right
Mhm.
ratios of what we should be putting in our bodies, on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to why there's a debate of whether you should be displaying those numbers, because a lot of people don't really know how to interpret it,
Yeah.
and I think it also kind of disconnects us from like, how do we feel? Like, am I hungry? Did I just go for a run and I need to replenish calorically? Like there's I think a disconnect of just like listening and getting in tune with our body. And so and then also like just focusing on maximizing, fruits and vegetables. I know I say it a bunch of times, and ask any dietitian, they're going to say the same thing. Like there's just an underconsumption, and if there's anything that we can't eat too much of, it's that. And so like when it comes to planning a menu, I try to focus on that and kind of think about the protein kind of like as a side almost,
Okay.
um, as like, because if you think about a plate, like you should be, eating mostly fruits and vegetables, whole grains, and then, the protein is, we actually don't need as much as we think.
Really? So
Yeah.
cauliflower, raw cauliflower, good.
Yeah. If you like it.
Well, that's an important thing. What
Yeah.
about what about cauliflower drenched in ranch dressing? Is that not as good?
Um,
I'm just kidding.
yeah.
So,
I mean, it's going to be, it depends on your condition too. I mean, yeah, it's going to be higher in fat, higher in sodium. Like it's, it's going to be more calorically dense, but it wouldn't be my preference,
you
I'd
are
say.
so nutritionally politically correct.
Well, you know what? I have two young kids, and I'm like teaching that we're like introducing foods and like getting them excited about foods, and it's not like, it's about enjoying it. And I think that my generation growing up, it was about what's good, what's bad, and like we've sort of lost this enjoyment of food, and for a lot of people. And so like for my young kids, and I think um, I'm not alone. Like we're trying to make them have a positive association. And so like if my daughter wants to eat ranch covered in, or cauliflower covered in ranch, like go for it. Like, you know, I want her to enjoy it and have a positive experience around food.
I think that's a really important distinction, and I think a sort of stigma from certainly my generation growing up, and absolutely inherited from our parents' generation,
Yep.
which is like, if it's good for you, it can't taste good. I mean, I'm broad brushing it, but like, you know, if I need to be health conscious, was like, I need to lose weight. Right. I need to go on like Weight Watchers or Jenny Craig or some sort of plan to reduce caloric intent, or, you know, intake to reduce my weight. And then I can go back to eating what I want, versus living day to day, being able to not, you know, to maintain a healthy physical lifestyle, but also eat delicious foods that you love. And I think that's I think what we lost a lot, certainly in the US, is like, you're either one side or the other, and I think what you're saying and what you're doing is you can have both. Eat healthy and also enjoy your food. And we're certainly seeing that across a lot more public menus in restaurants and otherwise.
Yeah, I think that, and kind of going back to your original question about, you know, when we were kids, like we had a lot of chicken nuggets and pizza or whatever, and like parents have sort of changed over their philosophy, and adults just in general. And I think there was a chapter where we were focused on, you know, I mean, still today, but like, you know, low calorie, everything has to be perfect and clean, good for you, bad for you. And I think now we're kind of entering this chapter of like, let's just enjoy food, and eating mostly foods that are good for you, but enjoying everything, and everything can fit.
Yeah. Just going to do a quick reset. We are here with Leah Beck, registered dietitian at Culinary Digital. We are out live on Tipping Point across YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. For folks out there in the audience, by all means, questions, comments. If you want to know what the best foods are, I'm sure Leah can absolutely 100% tell you what the best foods are, and what the worst foods are. But superfoods, that's a thing. I remember, you know, maybe a decade ago, I kept hearing about superfoods like avocados and almonds and things. What makes them superfoods?
I think it's what's trending, and what, you know, some unique compound that people haven't really been thinking about. I just was sitting in on a webinar, and they're talking about like mushrooms, you know, are the next superfood, and you know,
mushroom lobby.
But
can you talk a little bit about, and I do want to get back into sort of the higher ed and the technical side of this, and how folks are bringing these sort of these concepts to a more commoditized and large scale forum. Organic. I've heard a lot of different stories around what organic means and what it takes to be organic certified, and, you know, what are the benefits of something that is, quote, organic. Is that an area where you've got knowledge?
I mean, I can't speak to the technical. There is a technical definition. I can't speak to that. I mean, I think it goes back to what the value of the consumer, as a consumer, what your values are. Certainly organic implies that there's less chemicals involved in the growing process, and the integrity of the, you know, the conditions of the soil and this maintenance of how you grow the foods. There's been some research that indicates that it's, you know, the chemicals may not have a huge impact on your health. So, you know, whether it's organic or regular conventional cauliflower, like eat the cauliflower, you know, like, because not enough people are eating it. So just eat it.
So you're saying some cauliflower,
and there's
organic, is better than no cauliflower.
Exactly. And there's like I don't know if you've heard of like the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15, but that's those come out every year, but it's like the Clean 15 are like the cleanest foods that you don't need to buy organic.
Okay.
And then the dirty dozen are like the 12 foods that are most contaminated in the growing process. So those are the ones that you, if possible, or if you can, to choose organic.
Interesting. I will look those up. I am trying to be better, and I did buy like a whole vegetable tray from Costco. Granted, it has a big thing of ranch dip in the middle, but it's cauliflower and it's broccoli and it's, snow
Yeah.
peas, and it's delicious both ways, with and without the ranch.
Exactly.
All right, so you're at UC Davis. You were involved in the implementation of some food service tech, like ERP integrations across that university structure, and then you had a calling to come back to the East Coast to my and your home state of Connecticut, although I no longer live there. And what did you do when you came back east?
So I was at Yale. Yale actually at the time was looking to implement a new software. And so it was sort of serendipitous that I was looking to move back to Connecticut. And I also had this experience of doing implementation. So it was a perfect match. And I helped implement a software there for their campus food management software. And at the same time, I was also doing menu development, doing a lot of, food allergy management. So it's kind of a combination of systems administration and nutrition.
What were, having gone through two major systems in implementations at two pretty large and well-known universities, what were some of the obstacles, not with those institutions, but generally speaking, with project implementation from inception or from concept of we ought to do this, what's the need for it, through to execution and launch? What are the obstacles that you encounter in that environment?
I would say, I mean, you want to make sure that everyone's on board with, this change. You're changing everything. And time, I think it's easy to want to rush the process so that you can get live and going. But you're dealing with a lot of data, and you want to make sure everything is clean and streamlined before actually going live.
Yeah. And you are now with Culinary Digital, as we sort of touched on. Culinary, three major product offerings. What drives it is the food service ERP, so that's recipe management, and like as you noted, things like allergens, and gated menus for different folks. Whether it's elder care or healthcare hospitals who need gated menus, and then we talked a little bit about the menu planning, and then digital signage, which I think when you made a really great point. You made a lot of really great points, but one that really resonated with me is that sort of disconnect historically between whatever folks in the back office are creating the menus and ordering the food, and then it comes out and it's out there, but as a consumer, you've got questions about it. You might have some dietary restrictions, you might have some allergies. Were these chicken nuggets fried in peanut oil? I don't know, or more contemporarily, what specifically is in this Italian sub, like, and where does it come from, and what kind of meats are there? Can you talk a little bit about what is your? I don't know, this is sort of I don't know where I'm going with this, but like you said, there's sort of a debate between difference between naming the dish and naming it creatively, and including the ingredients, and then including the nutritional components, being transparent about. At some point, and I'm sure there are apps that do this, at some point we're going to have, like in a video game, we'll start at 0 when we wake up, and as we eat things, it'll like bump up the different like levels, and like once you hit 100, like you're good for the day. But yeah, what are you seeing as sort of the in your head, sort of the ideal higher education dining experience for folks? What are we moving toward, I guess, is my question, put simply.
what are we moving towards from a technology standpoint,
Yeah.
or dining
From a user experience, right? From walk me through what it looks like in your head, for a student to walk into a campus dining hall, and from walking in the door to checking out. How do you envision that experience, and what happens? I know it's a big question. What happens on the back end to make that happen?
I would be curious to see like how AI is integrated into this experience. I think that there's, this, I don't know, the next generation of kids, like their attention span is so shortened, and like they can't really do something for too long. So like, decision making, I think having some way to expedite the decisions, as they go through the dining hall, or what's available to them. I know there was a period of time where like customization was really trendy, and I think more global cuisine is kind of what's being explored right now. I don't know. I mean, and I also think access to information, like they want more information. And, when it comes to digital signage or digital displays, whatever that looks like, they want access to that information and have some control over that.
Yeah, you sort of reminded me of the generation, and certainly the next generation. There's this huge uptick in amongst Gen Zers, millennials into Gen Zers in particular, who are alcohol free. These alcohol free spirits, these companies are growing massively, and there's sort of a conscious social decision by a lot of folks in that generation to I don't want to put alcohol in my body, which I imagine also leads to, well, if I'm you think about college kids, there's a lot of drinking that happens in in the college community. These are folks that are saying, I don't want to put that in my body. You have to imagine that they have higher demands on the foods they're putting in their bodies also. And with the number of options that are out there now, I imagine that there's some level of risk in higher ed food service, especially those that are located in large cities. You've got restaurants, you've got Uber Eats, you've got Seamless, Grubhub, you've got all these other food options where they're not beholden to the school dining halls. So and that's a business, right? Part of the school is running a at least a break even dining service, if not profitable. So how are these institutions going to make their food service operations more streamlined, more efficient, and also deliver a better, more attractive, dining and customer experience than the alternatives that these students have?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big challenge, especially, universities in a city setting, when there's a lot of competition around. I also think that the dining halls, and I know, institutional food service has a variety of spaces, but like in colleges, I mean, it's also a community space. And I think that we are also craving like social connection. And is it possible to really emphasize that part of the dining experience, and like, making more communal seating arrangements, or I don't know, engaging students in a way that, like, I mean, so much of food is about community and connection and sharing that experience with other people. So, maybe emphasizing that or exploring that space.
Yeah. I wish I could go back. I would eat differently. I wouldn't do it all differently, but I would eat differently for sure. And I think the point about AI, obviously, it's the top of mind for everyone inside and outside of tech right now. And I know that you guys are doing a lot in the AI space around sourcing and food wastage, and reducing, sort of predictive analytics around data analysis, or predictive analytics around sort of demand and supply chain, which is a pretty exciting place to be. We are now going to move on to a quick lightning round. I'm excited for this one. It's sort of random questions I've thought of along the way. What is your favorite? I don't want to say food because that's not fair. I would say you make this more complicated because I would normally ask someone, these change every week. I would normally ask someone if, deserted island, you could only have like one meal for the rest of your life, but you would say, well, you need to diversify your meal. But if you could only, well, what is your favorite dish? I would say that. It gives you some options to play with.
Gosh, my favorite dish. I really love pasta, so probably some sort of pasta.
Okay. Are you a pet person?
I am. I have a lovely dog,
Okay.
Annie.
What kind of dog do you have?
She is a black lab mix.
Oh, very nice. We have a black lab mix as well. How old?
She's I think 8 years old. We say she's 8 years old. Yeah.
Okay.
But she looks like a puppy, so everyone thinks she's a puppy. We're like, no, she's
nice. I am also a dog person. And then my last lightning round is, and this is going to be a challenging one. I think. What is your, I don't want to say favorite. I'll say favorite. Commercial chain of purveyors of restaurants.
Oh my gosh. Commercial chain.
When it comes to like, if you look at like a a Wendy's or a Subway or a Chipotle or what do you think from like a health perspective? Which one would are you most comfortable bringing your kids to eat? I want to know.
I think Chipotle, like their menus, the way they have things set up, I think is really accessible to like, especially a lot of different diets and diet restrictions. I think that's like a very inclusive space. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, really appreciate you joining today. I learned a lot. I had some inherent guilt about the things that I've eaten in my life and continue to eat. So I am going to be a bit more responsible because I think, you don't know when you think back to, back to the day when like pregnant women would smoke and drink and like guys would have cigars and you didn't know any better. And maybe we didn't know any better growing up, and nor did our parents about healthy eating and the impacts on longevity and just quality of life. So I'm certainly going to double back with you and ask more questions down the road to see how I can improve my own, my own diet. But I'm pretty excited about what you guys are doing over at Culinary Digital with Culinary Suite, and we didn't talk about Culinary Suite 2.0 launching, was exciting. But the menus, the digital signage, I want to learn more about all that stuff. So thank you so much for joining, Leah. Once again, this is Tipping Point. We are signing off. Thanks so much for everyone who came out to listen and watch, and thanks so much to Preeti Verniker and Aaron Aguiar for helping set this up and do the production and creative around it. So thanks very much, Leah. Great chat.
Thanks for having me.
Enjoy the rest of your day and have a great weekend.
You too.